Donors usually contribute money before asking for privileges. The comments sliced through the elegant noise of the ballroom so cleanly that several nearby conversations stopped at once. A few guests laughed immediately. Others turned toward the entrance, curious to see who had become the evening's newest source of entertainment. Beneath towering crystal chandeliers and the warm glow of gold-accented lighting, Nia Hollis stood perfectly still. She wore a simple navy evening dress, tasteful but understated, the kind of outfit that disappeared among gowns worth more than most people earned in a month. Across from her stood Madeline Ashford, the billionaire's daughter and unofficial star of the annual Ashford Education Gala. With a champagne glass balanced effortlessly in one hand and a smile sharpened by confidence, Madeline looked Nia up and down as though she had already reached a conclusion. Around them, wealthy donors, executives, politicians, and socialites watched with growing interest. The ballroom of the Ashford Grand Hotel stretched across nearly 20,000 square feet, filled with white orchids, live music, and enormous video screens celebrating another year of charitable success. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. All attention settled on the quiet black woman standing at the edge of the VIP section. Nia did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply met Madeline's gaze and offered a small, polite smile. Somehow that seemed to irritate Madeline even more. "I am sure the general reception area is lovely," she added. Another round of laughter followed. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. The most unforgettable stories often begin with a moment that looks ordinary until the truth finally arrives. Nia glanced briefly around the room. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody questioned what had just happened. Most people seemed content to assume that Madeline was right. After all, this was her world. The Ashford name appeared on universities, museums, hospitals, and scholarship programs throughout the country. If Madeline believed someone did not belong in the VIP section, who would challenge her? A string quartet played softly near the stage. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. On massive screens hanging above the ballroom, photographs of smiling scholarship recipients cycled slowly beneath the gala's logo. Everything about the evening projected generosity, opportunity, and compassion. Yet standing beneath those screens, Nia could not help noticing the irony. "Is there a problem here?" a voice asked from nearby. Several guests turned. Madeline immediately brightened. "No problem at all," she replied. "Just a misunderstanding." Nia recognized the voice before she saw the man approaching. Graham Ashford, billionaire founder of Ashford Holdings and father of the young woman now blocking her path. Unlike his daughter, Graham's expression carried curiosity rather than judgment. He looked from Madeline to Nia, sensing something beneath the surface he could not yet identify. Nia remained calm. The city lights glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Beyond the glass, the skyline stretched endlessly into the night. Inside, surrounded by wealth and applause, nobody seemed to know who she was. That was exactly how Nia preferred it. What nobody in the ballroom realized was that the woman they had dismissed within seconds possessed a connection to this gala far deeper than any of them could imagine. And before the night was over, the truth would leave the entire room speechless. Graham studied the two women for a moment, sensing tension even though neither appeared openly confrontational. Madeline offered her father a reassuring smile. "Everything is fine," she said smoothly. "I was simply helping our guests find the correct section." Several nearby guests nodded as though the explanation settled the matter. Graham looked toward Nia. There was something unusual about her composure. Most people placed in an uncomfortable situation would either become defensive or leave. Nia did neither. She simply thanked him for his concern and stepped aside, allowing the conversation to end before it could become something larger. Graham gave a small nod before being pulled away by another group of donors eager for his attention. Within minutes, the crowd dispersed and the evening resumed its rhythm. Yet the experience lingered. Not because Nia felt embarrassed. She had encountered similar assumptions before. What stayed with her was how quickly people decided who belonged and who did not. The ballroom continued glowing beneath crystal chandeliers while speeches, networking, and charitable celebrations unfolded around her. Large screens displayed statistics highlighting the success of educational programs funded through the foundation. Smiling students appeared one after another. Scholarships awarded. schools renovated, opportunities created. Guests applauded each achievement as if witnessing a collective triumph. Nia watched quietly from the edge of the room. Very few people recognized her face, which was exactly how she preferred it. Years earlier, when her business ventures began generating extraordinary success, advisors repeatedly encouraged her to build a public profile. They recommended magazine covers, television appearances, and carefully managed publicity campaigns. Nia rejected all of it. She had grown up watching people chase recognition while forgetting the purpose behind their work. For her, impact mattered more than visibility. If a student received a scholarship, it made little difference whether the recipient knew who funded it. What mattered was the opportunity itself. That philosophy had shaped her life. While many philanthropists attached their names to buildings and programs, Nia routinely requested anonymity. She funded projects quietly. She donated through private channels. She avoided interviews whenever possible. As a result, many people knew her contributions without knowing her name. A waiter carrying sparkling water passed nearby. Nia accepted a glass and moved toward one of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city shimmered beneath the night sky. Streams of headlights moved through the streets below like rivers of light. Standing there, she felt far more comfortable than she had near the center of the ballroom. Across the room, Madeline continued greeting guests. The younger woman moved effortlessly from conversation to conversation, receiving compliments and admiration everywhere she went. People laughed at her jokes. They praised her leadership. They treated her like royalty. Nia observed the scene without resentment. In truth, she felt a little sadness. Not because of how Madeline had behaved, but because confidence built entirely on status often collapsed the moment status was removed. Near the stage, members of the Gala committee prepared for the evening's major fundraising presentation. Technicians adjusted lighting. Staff reviewed schedules. Donors settled into their seats. The program's next segment would highlight educational achievements from the past decade. Nia noticed several statistics displayed on a rehearsal monitor. One figure immediately caught her attention. She narrowed her eyes. The number looked wrong. Not slightly wrong. Significantly wrong. At first she assumed it was a formatting error. Then she noticed another inconsistency. A second number conflicted with data she knew personally. Her expression changed. The discrepancy seemed small enough that most guests would never notice. Yet it affected the entire presentation. Nia glanced toward the stage again. The countdown clock indicated only a few minutes remained before the fundraising segment began. Around her, nobody appeared aware that a mistake was about to be presented in front of hundreds of influential donors. And as the final preparations continued beneath the warm ballroom lights, Nia found herself facing a difficult decision. She could remain silent and avoid drawing attention to herself, or she could speak up and risk becoming the center of attention once again. Madeline Ashford loved evenings like this. Standing near the center of the ballroom beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, she moved effortlessly through circles of donors, executives, and public figures who treated her as though she were already running the foundation herself. Every conversation seemed to confirm what she had believed for most of her life. The Ashford name opened doors. The Ashford name built schools. The Ashford name changed lives. At least that was the story she had always heard. Guests complimented her dress. They praised the gala. They congratulated her on another successful year of fundraising. Madeline accepted every compliment with practiced ease. Around her, servers carried silver trays through the crowd while a live orchestra performed near the stage. Massive digital screens displayed photographs of smiling students, alongside statistics, celebrating a decade of educational impact. The atmosphere felt triumphant. Yet only a short distance away, Nia continued studying the presentation data displayed on a monitor reserved for event staff. The numbers still bothered her. She reviewed them again. One scholarship total exceeded the verified records by several hundred recipients. Another figure combined two separate grant programs into a single category, creating an inaccurate representation of funding distribution. Most people would never notice the difference. But Nia knew the programs intimately. More intimately than anyone in the room realized. She took a slow breath. Speaking up would attract attention. Remaining silent would allow misinformation to become part of the official presentation. Neither option appealed to her. Eventually responsibility won. Nia approached a young event coordinator reviewing notes beside the stage. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I believe there may be an error in the scholarship statistics." The coordinator looked surprised but listened. Nia pointed toward the monitor and carefully explained the discrepancy. The young woman frowned and checked her paperwork. "I am not sure," she admitted. "These numbers came directly from the executive planning team." "I understand," Nia replied. "I only wanted someone to review them before the presentation begins." The conversation should have ended there. Unfortunately, someone else overheard it. Madeline. Drawn by the mention of the gala presentation, she approached with several guests following behind her. "An error?" she asked. The coordinator immediately looked nervous. Nia remained calm. "Possibly. I may be mistaken, but I believe one of the scholarship totals is inaccurate." Madeline glanced at the monitor and then back at Nia. Her expression revealed immediate skepticism. "Those numbers were prepared by professionals." "I am sure they were," Nia answered. "That is why I thought it would be worth double-checking." A few nearby guests exchanged amused glances. The atmosphere began shifting once again. Madeline folded her arms. "And how exactly would you know the scholarship totals?" The question sounded casual, but everyone nearby recognized the challenge hidden beneath it. Nia considered several possible answers. She could explain. She could reveal more about herself. Instead, she chose honesty without explanation. "I have followed the programs closely." A man standing beside Madeline laughed softly. "That is one way to put it." More guests gathered. Curiosity spread quickly through the ballroom. Madeline looked increasingly entertained. To her, this seemed absurd. An unknown guest had questioned official numbers at one of the most prestigious charity events in New York. The situation practically invited ridicule. Near the back of the gathering, Graham noticed the growing crowd and turned his attention toward the stage area. Something about the scene immediately concerned him. Meanwhile, the coordinator continued comparing documents. Her expression slowly changed. Confusion replaced confidence. She checked the monitor again. Then the paperwork. Then the monitor once more. Nia noticed the shift immediately. So did Madeline. For the first time all evening, uncertainty entered the conversation. And as the countdown clock moved closer to the start of the presentation, the possibility that Nia might actually be correct became impossible to ignore. The event coordinator stared at the documents in her hands longer than anyone expected. The laughter that had surrounded the conversation only moments earlier began fading into uncertainty. Guests noticed it immediately. People who had been smiling now leaned closer, trying to understand why she suddenly looked concerned. The young woman compared the figures again, her eyes moving rapidly between the printed reports and the presentation monitor. Then she quietly excused herself and hurried toward the technical team positioned near the stage. Madeline watched her go and rolled her eyes. "This is becoming far more dramatic than it needs to be." Several guests chuckled in agreement. Nia remained calm. She had not intended to create a scene. She only wanted the information corrected before it reached the audience. Yet somehow every attempt to stay invisible seemed to produce the opposite result. Around them, the ballroom continued glowing beneath golden light. The orchestra transitioned into another elegant arrangement, while donors found their seats for the fundraising presentation. Giant screens displayed images of students walking across graduation stages and entering college campuses. The message was clear. Education changed lives. Opportunity mattered. Tonight existed to celebrate that mission. Graham approached the gathering just as the coordinator returned. Her expression was noticeably different now. Gone was the uncertainty. In its place stood something closer to alarm. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "there appears to be a discrepancy in the scholarship data." Several conversations stopped immediately. Graham frowned. "What kind of discrepancy?" The coordinator glanced toward Nia before answering. "The scholarship totals included in the presentation do not match the verified annual reports." A murmur moved through the surrounding guests. Madeline folded her arms. "There must be some mistake." "That is what I thought," the coordinator admitted. "But I checked the records twice." Graham accepted the documents and reviewed them himself. His expression gradually tightened. Nia could see the moment he realized the numbers did not align. The difference was not catastrophic, but it was significant enough to create a misleading impression of the foundation's impact. Can this be corrected before the presentation? Graham asked. Yes, the coordinator replied. But we need approval immediately. Madeline looked stunned. Not because of the error itself. Because the warning had come from the one person she least expected. The room grew quieter. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. Some looked toward Nia with renewed curiosity. Others appeared uncomfortable remembering their earlier reactions. Madeline forced a smile. Well, that was fortunate. Her tone suggested she wanted the matter finished. Instead, one of the donors standing nearby asked a simple question. How did she notice it? The silence that followed felt heavier than the question deserved. Graham looked toward Nia. The coordinator did the same. Even Madeline seemed reluctant to hear the answer. Nia hesitated briefly. I am familiar with the scholarship reports. Familiar, another guest repeated. Those reports are not exactly public reading material. A few people nodded. It was a fair observation. The annual data was typically reviewed only by foundation leadership, auditors, and major contributors. Nia offered no additional explanation. The less she said, the more curious the room became. Graham continued studying her. Earlier in the evening he had sensed there was something unusual about her presence. Now that feeling had grown stronger. Before he could ask another question, the gala director stepped onto the stage. The lights dimmed slightly. Conversations softened. The formal presentation was about to begin. Guests turned toward the giant screens while technicians finalized updates behind the scenes. Nia quietly stepped away from the crowd and moved toward one of the tall windows overlooking Manhattan. She hoped the attention would shift elsewhere. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. Behind the stage curtain, several senior members of the foundation were reviewing revised reports generated after the correction. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the internal funding records. The discovery left them stunned. Within minutes, whispered conversations began spreading among the leadership team. And while the audience prepared to celebrate a decade of educational success, a revelation far bigger than a statistical error was slowly making its way toward the stage. Nia stood alone beside the towering glass windows while the gala presentation began. Below, Manhattan sparkled beneath the night sky, thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon like a living constellation. Inside the ballroom, applause erupted as the first segment of the program celebrated 10 years of educational achievement. Images of students receiving diplomas flashed across enormous screens. Families smiled. Graduates crossed stages. Scholarship recipients shared brief testimonials about opportunities that changed their lives forever. The audience responded warmly. For most guests, it was exactly the evening they expected. For Nia, it felt strangely distant. She watched the city instead of the presentation. She had spent years supporting programs like these without seeking recognition. Tonight should have been no different. Yet the atmosphere around her continued shifting. Near the stage, several members of the foundation leadership exchanged increasingly serious looks. Documents moved from hand to hand. Quiet conversations unfolded behind curtains and beside technical stations. Something had clearly changed after the records were reviewed. Nia noticed it immediately. She also knew exactly what they had probably found. Across the ballroom, Madeline attempted to return her attention to the program. Unfortunately, curiosity had already taken hold. Several guests continued glancing toward Nia. Some whispered. Others appeared to be searching their memories, trying to place a face they suddenly suspected might be more important than they first believed. The attention irritated Madeline more than she cared to admit. Earlier, everyone had been focused on the gala. Now conversations kept circling back to the same woman. Eventually, Madeline crossed the ballroom toward the window. Two friends followed behind her. You seem very interested in our scholarship reports, she said. Nia turned from the skyline. I care about educational programs. That much is obvious. Madeline smiled, but there was little warmth in it. What is less obvious is why. Several nearby guests pretended not to listen while listening very carefully. Nia remained composed. Education changes lives. That is a nice answer. Madeline took a sip of champagne. But it does not explain how you knew figures that even some of our donors did not know. The question lingered between them. Nia could have answered directly. She chose not to. I have followed the programs for a long time. Madeline laughed softly. You keep saying that. One of her friends joined in. Maybe she memorizes annual reports for fun. A few people nearby chuckled. The laughter spread quickly. Not as loudly as before, but enough. Nia felt the familiar sting of being underestimated. Not because it hurt her feelings. Because it revealed how eager people were to dismiss what they did not understand. Madeline noticed the silence and mistook it for weakness. You know, she continued, there is a difference between admiring a foundation and helping build one. Several guests nodded. Others smiled. The implication was obvious. Whatever connection Nia believed she had to the programs, it could not possibly compare to the role of the Ashford family. At least that was what Madeline assumed. Nearby, Graham observed the exchange from across the room. His expression darkened slightly. He had already begun questioning the assumptions made earlier in the evening. The more he watched, the more uncomfortable he became. Nia looked calmly at Madeline. For a moment it seemed she might finally respond. Instead she simply smiled. I hope the presentation goes well. The answer frustrated Madeline even more. Before she could continue, movement near the stage drew everyone's attention. The chairman of the foundation had unexpectedly stepped away from the prepared program. Several executives joined him. Their expressions were unusually serious. Technicians exchanged hurried instructions. The giant screens briefly went dark before displaying a completely different presentation file. Conversations throughout the ballroom faded. Guests turned toward the stage. Something unscheduled was happening. Nia recognized the signs immediately. The leadership team had discovered far more than a reporting error. And as the chairman approached the microphone with a look of astonishment still visible on his face, the room unknowingly moved one step closer to a revelation that would change the entire evening. The ballroom gradually fell silent as the chairman stepped behind the podium. Even the orchestra lowered their instruments and waited. The giant screens that had been displaying student success stories moments earlier now showed a simple title slide bearing the foundation logo. Guests exchanged curious glances. Unscheduled changes rarely happened at events of this scale. Something important had interrupted the program. Near the windows, Nia quietly folded her hands and watched. She already suspected what had happened backstage. The foundation leadership had finally connected the numbers, the reports, and the funding records. It was only a matter of time before everyone else did too. The chairman adjusted the microphone and looked across the crowd. His expression carried an unusual mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, before we continue with tonight's presentation, there is something I recently learned that I feel obligated to share. The room grew even quieter. Hundreds of guests focused their attention on the stage. Madeline stood near the front with her friends, her earlier confidence beginning to fade beneath growing uncertainty. Graham remained seated at one of the central tables, his eyes fixed on the chairman. This evening was intended to celebrate 10 years of educational impact, the chairman continued. Thousands of students have received scholarships. Hundreds of families have benefited from programs that opened doors previously closed to them. Images of graduates appeared on the screens once again. Smiling faces, college campuses, acceptance letters, stories of opportunity. Applause briefly rippled through the audience before fading. The chairman took a slow breath. Like many of you, I believe these achievements were the result of contributions from dozens of generous supporters. He paused. What I discovered tonight is that one individual has quietly carried a far greater portion of that responsibility than anyone realized. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Donors looked around the room. Some smiled, expecting a familiar name. Others whispered predictions to the people beside them. Madeline glanced toward her father. Graham appeared just as surprised as everyone else. Over the last decade, the chairman continued, this individual has funded scholarship programs, educational grants, mentorship initiatives, school technology upgrades, emergency student assistance funds, and countless opportunities that changed lives. The screens transitioned again. New numbers appeared. Larger numbers. Much larger. The audience reacted immediately. Several guests leaned forward. Others exchanged astonished looks. Even experienced philanthropists seemed surprised by the scale. Many of these contributions were intentionally anonymous, the chairman said. In fact, our records show repeated requests to remove public recognition whenever possible. Nia lowered her gaze toward the city lights beyond the glass. She had made those requests countless times. Recognition was never the goal. Opportunity was. Across the ballroom, Madeline felt an uncomfortable sensation building in her chest. Something about the chairman's tone no longer felt like a routine announcement. Around her, guests listened with complete attention. Tonight, he said, while reviewing records connected to the scholarship correction that was brought to our attention earlier, our leadership team uncovered the full extent of those contributions. The room became perfectly still. Nobody laughed now. Nobody whispered. The chairman looked toward the audience, then toward a specific section of the ballroom. Several guests followed his gaze. Then more. Heads slowly turned in the same direction. Madeline noticed it too. People were looking toward the windows. Toward Nia. A chill moved through her. Graham followed the crowd's attention and immediately saw the woman standing quietly apart from everyone else. For a moment the billionaire simply stared. The chairman smiled softly. There are moments when generosity deserves recognition, even when the person responsible never asks for it. The screens behind him faded to black. Then a new image appeared. A photograph. A name. The entire ballroom inhaled at once. And in the silence that followed, every assumption made throughout the evening stood on the edge of collapse. The photograph filled the enormous screens hanging above the ballroom. It was simple. No dramatic graphics. No elaborate introduction. Just a smiling image of Nia Hollis standing beside a group of scholarship recipients several years earlier. Beneath the photograph appeared a single line of text. Founder of the Hollis Education Initiative. Primary benefactor and long-term strategic partner. For a moment nobody reacted. The information seemed too unexpected for the room to process immediately. Then the chairman spoke again. Over the last 10 years, Ms. Hollis has personally funded educational programs that have supported more than 30,000 students across the country. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Guests stared at the screens. Others stared at Nia. Some looked back and forth between the two as if trying to reconcile the woman they had dismissed with the accomplishments now being revealed. The chairman continued. Many of our most successful scholarship programs would not exist today without her support. New images appeared. Students receiving awards. Schools opening technology centers. Young graduates standing beside families. Program after program carried a small note indicating financial support provided through the Hollis Initiative. The numbers displayed beneath the images were staggering. Millions of dollars. Then tens of millions. Then more. The room sat in stunned silence. Madeline felt her face grow warm. The confidence that had carried her throughout the evening disappeared completely. Every conversation replayed in her mind with painful clarity. The comments near the VIP section. The laughter. The assumptions. The questions she had asked with such certainty. Suddenly they sounded very different. Nearby, her friends looked equally shocked. Nobody seemed able to find the right words. Graham slowly rose from his seat. He had spent years working alongside foundation leadership. Yet even he had never understood the full extent of Nia's involvement. The chairman smiled toward the audience. What makes this even more remarkable is that Ms. Hollis repeatedly requested that her name be removed from public recognition whenever possible. Another wave of astonishment moved through the crowd. Many wealthy donors spent enormous effort ensuring their contributions were visible. The idea that someone would intentionally avoid recognition felt almost unimaginable. Nia remained near the window. The city lights reflected softly across the glass behind her. She looked neither proud nor triumphant. If anything, she appeared slightly uncomfortable with the attention. That detail affected the room more than the announcement itself. She was not enjoying this moment. She had never wanted it. The chairman stepped away from the podium briefly and gestured toward the screen. A final statistic appeared. Nearly 40% of the foundation's educational funding over the previous decade had originated directly or indirectly through programs supported by Nia Hollis. Audible disbelief spread throughout the ballroom. Several guests covered their mouths. Others shook their heads in amazement. A few of the largest donors exchanged stunned looks, realizing that the quiet woman standing alone by the window had contributed more than many of them combined. Graham finally walked toward Nia. The crowd instinctively parted to let him pass. Every eye followed him. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Nia smiled warmly and accepted the gesture. Around them, the ballroom remained silent. Not because people lacked words. Because none of the words seemed sufficient. Madeline stood motionless near the front of the room. The reality of what had happened settled heavily upon her. She had spent the evening assuming she understood who mattered. She had measured worth through appearance, status, and familiarity. Now every assumption had collapsed in front of hundreds of witnesses. The screens continued displaying stories of students whose lives had changed because someone believed in their future. And as those images illuminated the ballroom, the room finally understood that the most important person present had been standing among them all evening, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, and quietly carrying a legacy far greater than anyone had imagined. For several long seconds after Graham thanked her, nobody moved. The ballroom seemed suspended in a strange stillness, as though the evening itself had paused to absorb what had just happened. The giant screens continued displaying photographs of students whose futures had been transformed through scholarships, mentorships, and educational opportunities. Faces filled with hope illuminated the room. Yet most guests were no longer looking at the screens. They were looking at Nia. Earlier that evening, many of those same people had barely noticed her. Now they could not look away. One by one, conversations began again, but the tone had changed completely. The laughter was gone. The assumptions were gone. In their place stood genuine respect. Several donors approached Nia first. Some wanted to thank her. Others wanted to introduce themselves properly. A few admitted they had benefited from programs she had supported without ever realizing who made them possible. Nia listened graciously, offering the same warmth she had shown all evening. She did not mention the comments made earlier. She did not remind anyone how quickly they had judged her. She simply treated each person with kindness. Across the room, Madeline remained frozen. The applause that eventually filled the ballroom felt distant to her. Every image on the screen seemed to deepen the weight she carried. She had spent years believing generosity belonged to those whose names appeared on buildings and plaques. Yet the woman she had dismissed had spent a decade changing lives while asking for no recognition at all. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Nearby guests noticed her discomfort. Some offered sympathetic looks. Others quietly avoided eye contact. No one seemed eager to revisit the confidence she displayed earlier. Eventually, Madeline took a slow breath and began walking toward Nia. The crowd noticed immediately. Conversations softened. People stepped aside. Even the chairman paused his remarks as attention shifted toward the two women. Nia saw her approaching and met her gaze calmly. For a moment neither spoke. The ballroom fell quiet once again. Madeline looked down briefly before finding the courage to speak. "I owe you an apology." Her voice was softer than anyone had heard all evening. There was no arrogance left in it. No performance. Only honesty. Nia listened without interrupting. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," Madeline continued. "I assumed things I should never have assumed. And I treated you unfairly." The admission seemed to surprise even some of Madeline's closest friends. She looked genuinely ashamed. "I am sorry." The silence that followed felt different from the earlier silences. This one carried humility, reflection, growth. Many people expected Nia to deliver a speech. Others expected her to remind the room what had happened. Instead, she simply smiled. "Thank you." Nothing more. The simplicity of the response seemed to affect the crowd deeply. There was no revenge, no public embarrassment, no attempt to reverse the humiliation. Nia offered the one thing Madeline least expected: grace. Tears briefly gathered in Madeline's eyes before she blinked them away. For the first time that evening, she understood something that years of privilege had hidden from her. Character could not be measured by wealth, clothing, influence, or social status. The most powerful person in the room had never needed everyone to know it. Around them, applause slowly began building again. This time it was different. It was not applause for a donation total or a fundraising milestone. It was applause for something far more human. Graham watched the exchange with quiet admiration. The chairman smiled. Guests stood from their tables. The ballroom filled with warmth that had been missing earlier in the night. Above them, the screens continued showing students whose lives had been changed by opportunities they never saw coming. And standing beneath those images, Nia remained exactly who she had been from the beginning. The room had changed. She had not. As the evening slowly approached its end, the energy inside the ballroom transformed into something quieter and far more meaningful. The formal program concluded. The orchestra returned to soft music. Conversations resumed throughout the room, but the atmosphere no longer felt like a gathering centered on prestige and influence. It felt human. Guests who had spent years attending charity galas found themselves discussing something entirely different from fundraising totals or business partnerships. They were talking about humility. They were talking about assumptions. Most of all, they were talking about the woman standing near the edge of the ballroom who had never once tried to impress anyone. Nia spent the next hour speaking with scholarship recipients, educators, and foundation volunteers. Those conversations mattered more to her than any recognition from the stage. Several students attending the gala approached to thank her personally. One young woman explained that a scholarship had allowed her to become the first person in her family to attend college. Another described how an emergency grant kept him enrolled when he thought he would have to leave school. Nia listened to each story carefully. Those moments reminded her why she began supporting education years earlier. Not for headlines. Not for applause. For people. Across the room, Graham watched many of those conversations unfold. The more he observed, the more he understood why Nia had chosen anonymity. Every interaction centered on others rather than herself. Even after the revelation, she seemed uncomfortable whenever attention returned to her accomplishments. Eventually, Graham approached and joined her near one of the tall windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glowed beneath the night sky, reflecting across the glass like scattered stars. "I have attended hundreds of events like this," he said quietly. "I do not think I have ever seen a room change so completely." Nia smiled softly. People are usually better than their first impression. Graham considered that. "You are more generous than most." Nia looked toward the skyline. Everyone carries assumptions. The important thing is what they do after discovering they were wrong. Nearby, Madeline stood speaking with several foundation volunteers. She looked different now. The confidence remained, but something else had joined it. Perspective. Every so often her eyes drifted toward Nia. Not with embarrassment anymore. With respect. As midnight approached, guests gradually began leaving. Luxury cars lined the entrance outside. Farewells echoed through the lobby. Staff members began clearing tables and collecting decorations. The giant screens continued displaying photographs of students whose lives had been transformed through education. Those images remained long after most guests stopped paying attention to them. Eventually, Nia collected her coat. She quietly thanked the chairman, several volunteers, and members of the foundation staff. Then she made her way toward the exit. Graham walked beside her. When they reached the grand entrance, both paused for a moment. Cool night air drifted into the building each time the doors opened. Beyond them, Manhattan shimmered beneath the lights of another ordinary evening. Yet for many people inside the ballroom, nothing about this night would feel ordinary for a very long time. Nia stepped outside first. The pavement reflected the city lights after a brief evening rain. Traffic moved steadily through the streets. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed before fading into the background noise of the city. Graham remained near the entrance watching her walk away. She moved through the glow of streetlights with the same quiet confidence she had carried all evening. No entourage followed her. No cameras surrounded her. No announcement marked her departure. Yet everyone who had witnessed the events of the night understood something they had not understood when she arrived. True influence rarely announces itself. True generosity does not demand recognition. And true character reveals itself most clearly when a person has every reason to seek revenge but chooses grace instead. Behind Graham, the ballroom had grown nearly silent. The flowers remained. The chandeliers still sparkled. The screen still displayed smiling Stude.